Hey guys, welcome back. In today's videos, we will talk about the Text Plus. I already showed you how to work with text. If you haven't watched it, then I recommend that you go back and watch it, and I will leave the link to it in the description. Drag the Text Plus to its own track, hover over it so you can see it, and then click on it. Once you click on it, we have the settings in the inspectors. We have many options in the inspector for the Text Plus, and we will go through them all. So we have the text, we have the layout, we have transform, shading, and then image and settings. So first the text, the first thing you have the box where you add your text. With the Text Plus, you can animate it. Then the color, size, tracking, and all of these, by the way, they are mostly animatables. That's one of the advantages for using the Text Plus over the regular text. And by the way, if you see a dot under a slider, that means this is a default value, and if you click it, it will move it to the default value. Tracking, which is the distance between the letters. Line spacing, if I have multiple lines, then that will control the spacing between them. We have the V anchor and we have the H anchor, and those are kind of like the vertical pivot and the horizontal pivot for the text. We usually use those when we start adding stuff like rotation, scaling. Then we have the direction, and that's based on the language you're writing with. Left to right, right to left, top down, and bottom up. The next one is right on. If I move this end, it will start hiding the text from this end. And if I move this, we could hide from this end. And you can animate this. After that, we have the advanced control and tab spacing. Those are just extra options for the spacing between the letters. Next, we have the layout. In the layout, we treat the text as one block. So we have multiple types for the layout. We have the point, frame, circle, and path. Let's start with the point. In the point, we have the center X, Y, and Z, and those represent the transformation of the block. So we can move it in the horizontal axis, and we can move it vertically. Then we have the center Z. Center Z is simply like moving in and out of the frame. So it's kind of like mimicking a camera. Like if we increase it, as if we zoom out, and if we increase it, we zoom in. Next, we have the size, similar to what we have in the text. And finally, the perspective. For the perspective to work, we need to have a value in the Z or the Z axis. So if we change it a little bit, whether we decrease it or increase it, then we play with the perspective. Think of it as a multiplier for the transformation on the Z axis. Then we have the rotation. So you have the X and Y and Z axis. So for example, like if we rotate it on the X, you can see what's going to happen. We can rotate it on the Y axis and so on. And the point from where the text is rotating based on the anchor. So if we change this anchor to the left and we come back here and rotate around the Y axis, as you can see, it will use that anchor as its own pivot. Finally, we have the background, and the background is simply the entire frame, so we can change the color for the background. You could use the alpha to make it completely opaque. That's for the point. Now, if we switch from the point to the frame, to be honest, I don't see that much of a difference between the point and the frame. I'm not saying there isn't, probably there is, but for me, like, it was meaningless. Then we have the circle option. It will add the text to the circumference of a circle that we can control its measurement from the options down here. And we can have multiple lines, and actually I want to have multiple lines just to show you some of those options and how it affects the look based on those options. So we have the center again, X, Y, and Z, and those are the same as the one in the point. So we can move it in the Z axis, we can move it right to left, and so on. Let's move it down so we can see it. And the perspective, same thing. Next to that, we have fit characters, and this option, especially if the line, like one of the line was bigger than the other, sometimes you will see that they're not fitting nicely with each other. First, we have none, and none is simply trying to keep them aligned with each other. But the problem is it made the second line really compressed with each other to the level where it might get illegible and you can't read it. If you don't like that option, you could go to the spacing fit. It will keep the text the same size for both lines, but it will spread the text depending on the length of the line. So next to that, we have horizontal size fit. Keep the spacing between the letters, but it will make like each letter squeezed in the horizontal axis to make it fit. Lastly, we have adjust size to fit. And in this option, what it did, it changed the size of the second line to make it fit the same space. Then we have the rotation, and like one of the cool one is when you play with the Z axis. Then finally, we have the path. When we switch to the path, it seems as if nothing happened, but the reason why this is, unlike when we switch to the circle, is because we don't have a path yet. And to do that, we need to go to Fusion, and now to work with it, I need to select this while my template or my text is set to path. Now I can start drawing a path. So you don't need to add any extra node, you just start clicking, and the moment I click here, like the second point, it will start attaching my text to it. And once you want to end this, what you need to do is from this bar on top, we have the tools necessary to edit and change this path. And one of them is this icon. If you click on it, or if you don't want to click on it, let's just go back to this. What we could do is hit Shift N, then go back to the edit page. The only new option we get is the position on path. We can animate along the path we added. So we could like take this and put it like to -1, then move a little bit forward and then add another one, then change this. And the thing is, you can see the keyframes here, and that's one of the differences between using the text and the text plus, because the text plus is a Fusion template. If you wanted to play with the keyframes, then you have to go to the Fusion tab to do that. So if you want me to show you how to do it in the future, let me know in the comment. In the transform tab, the difference between this and the one before it, here where we can add the animation and the transformation on a character level, on a word level, or on a line level. So we have 3 different levels that we can work with: characters, words, lines, and we can do them all together. So you can change the characters and go back to words and change it and add animation to it and so on. And I will do it like quickly just to show you like the amount of potential you have when you work with it. First, we have the spacing, which is spacing between the characters. And then we have the pivot. If you want to move anything, this is like the pivot for my transformation. When I start adding rotation, shear, and size. For now, we'll leave it set to 0, and you start playing with it based on what you want, like what the effect you're looking for. For the most part, usually I don't change these values for the pivot. We have the rotation around the x-axis, we have it around the y, and here, especially when you do it on the y and the z, you can see it, like the difference between the character and the words. Then we have the shear. So the shear is just adding a slant or tilt to the letters, and then we have the size, separating the x and the y instead of having like one uniform proportional scaling, and you can take it all the way down to 0 and make it unfold in a nice way. What we could do, add a frame here, move a little bit forward and maybe add like 360, then go towards. Same thing, we add frame to the Y, 360, and then we go back and put it to 0. So now when we animate it, they animate in the character level and on the word level. Next is the shading. And the shading is simply like the appearance and the formatting of your text. So we have 8 elements, and each one of these elements, think of it as layers, adding strokes and fill and other type of styling. By default, they're already named and have values, but you can always change them. So the first one is already named white solid fill, but you can change the color down here. Then next to it is turned off, but it says red outline. So once we activate it, it will add an outline to the text. And then the one next to it is a shadow. Number 4 is blue border. And from 5 to 8, they are empty elements that you can use as you like. The first one is simply a fill, and we have sort by priority, and there's a name. You can change the name. Below it, we have the properties, and the first one is the appearance. In the appearance, we have a fill, we have stroke, we have border, and we have border outline. And if I turn each one of them on one by one, you can tell the border is simply a border. And then we have the fill, then we have the border of the fill. Then you have the opacity. You can play with the opacity. You have the composite. We have solid, transparent, composite for the blending. Then we have the type, solid, image, gradient. Solid is simply just one color. A gradient is a gradient color where we can change the gradient down here. So if you select one of those colors and change it, and you can add more colors if you want by clicking anywhere along this bar. So if I click here and then here, like we could have like rainbow color kinda. And to compress the colors, either we move these in until they start showing up, or another way is to use mapping size. So if we move it down, we can like compress the gradient to see more of that gradient. There is the mapping aspect, and this one is just stretching. After that, we have the mapping angle, and we use it to change the angle of the gradient. And then we have the mapping level. If we select full image, it will treat it as one gradient, like the entire thing as one image. And you can scale it down to see more of the colors there. And all of these options are simply different ways of treating the gradient. So we have it on the entire text level, we have it on a line level. The other option here, other than the gradient and the solid, is image. When the source image is set to tool, I honestly couldn't find anywhere how it works. And I think the way to work with it is going to be through the Fusion page. So if anyone knows how it works, please leave it in the comment. That would be helpful. But for now, let's skip tool. There is the clip and there is the brush. Brush is meaningless. Honestly, I'll show it to you quickly, but the clip is the most interesting one you will use. So if we have the clip, if I go and browse my PC for an image, so I can select an image, let's say this one. As you can see, maybe it's hard to tell what's going on, but I have the image really scaled down on each character on its own. As for the image edges, we have the wrap, and the wrap simply is duplicating the image. So if the image is small, it will duplicate it to fill the entire character or the entire word. The other option is duplicate, and what duplicate will do, it will repeat the last pixel of the image border to fill the rest of the text. As you can see, there is the image in the middle, and everything else is just as if we stretch the last pixel. And then there's the mapping aspect. Remember when I said the mapping aspect is simply stretching it or squeezing it vertically, and that's what it does. And finally, the mapping level is where you can pick whether you want the mapping to be per character or if you want it to be per word or per line. Next, we have softness, and softness is simply a blur added to the text. Let's just give it a color. Once we have it, we can add a glow. The glow can be added only when we have some softness. So if I were to reset this, you won't get any of that glow. After the softness, we have the position, and in the position we have priority. I can't show it to you now until I have other elements added because it's not going to make sense now. But then we have the offset Z and we have the pivot X, Y, and Z. So the offset is again another value where you can change depth as if you're zooming in and out. So that's it mostly for this part of the text plus options, the shading part. And the only thing left is just to add more elements. So activate these. So now we have like a stroke. You could change same thing. If you don't want it to be a stroke, you could change it to something else. And you can change opacity, composite, so on. Change, for example, the joint style. So if you want it to be sharp, then you can select this. If you want it to be smooth, then you select this one, which is round. But for the most part, I will keep it at smooth. Then you have the line style where you can select between dashes or dots and dashes. And after that, we have the color for this. You can change the color of it. And same thing, we have softness. So if you want it to be soft, for these dots, we can make them soft. If you want to mimic like the effect of a glow, you could do that by changing these and adding a glow. So if let's just change my dashes to solid and add a glow. So you can kind of like fake the effect of a glow and make it really soft. And down here we have the position and the rotation. And the cool thing, because these elements kind of like detach from each other, so we can move these. But for some of them that wouldn't make sense. So let me just move offset in the Z. It will make sense for the most when you use it for the shadow, where you can move the shadow and change its position. Now let's talk about the priority slider, but before we talk about it, if we scroll all the way up, you'll find that the sort by is set to priority, and that's why we can use this slider. So if I want to push this stroke on top of it, we just move this slider a little bit forward, and here it is. Part of the stroke was hidden behind, so it's kind of like adding the stroke 50-50 inside and outside, but because the fill is on top of it, you couldn't see it. That's it for the shading part of the Texture Plus, and what's left for us is to talk about the motion blur. So if we go to the settings, we have the motion blur activated, but to see the effect of the motion blur, we need to add some animation. So go back to the layout and add a keyframe to the center X and Y. Then move the playhead few frames in time and change your X or Y or both of them. Change the value. Now if we move the playhead somewhere in the middle, you can see the effect of the motion blur happening. Let's go back to the motion blur and talk about these values. The most important values are the first two, the quality and the shutter angle. So the shutter angle is what's controlled the amount of the blurriness that's happening, and the quality is the quality of that blurriness. So if I were to zoom in, you can see that the quality isn't great. So if I increase my quality, it will get even more blurry and much smoother. And if I wanted to increase the amount of the blurriness, not the quality of it, then the shutter is what I need to play with. So if I moved it to the right, we increase it, and if I move it to the left, we decrease it. That's it for this video, and I hope you liked it. And don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get notified when there is a new content.